はい、皆さんこんにちは。今日はピート・シューマー先生に囲碁のワークショップをしていただきます。シューマー先生はミドルベリー大学で数学わかりますか？数学と自然哲学を教えておられますが、シューマー先生は日本の慶応大学、それから同志社大学、慶応大学は東京にあります。同志社大学は京都にあります。そしてミドルベリー・イン・ジャパンのあるオフィスのある国際キリスト教大学 ICU にも行かれました。そしてミドルベリー大学では数学と哲学のコースの他にFYSE1175 The Game of Go や INTD0123 Game of Go Japanese Culture のコースを教えておられます。このワークショップは英語でします。ですから今から6時半頃までプレッジを解除します。いいですね。シューマー先生のお話は英語です。ということで、without further ado, let's welcome Pete Schumer 先生。
May I take check? I've been introduced better than I can introduce myself. So anyway, very pleased to be here. I've been at Middlebury for almost 40 years, 39 years, I think. And I teach a course on the game of Go, as you just heard, a first-year seminar. But I also, this past year, finally got to teach another course, which was a little more involved Go, but also involved other Japanese traditional arts and cultural things, which interest me as well. You know, for example, like tea ceremony and ikebana, things like that, and how it relates to Go. But during my 1 hour here, I'll tell you a bit about Go, and perhaps you get to play a little bit. Feel free to get up and go at any point. Go is an ancient game. It's probably 4,000 years old. No one knows for sure, but it comes from China originally. That's where the oldest boards have been unearthed. But about 1,500 years ago, so it's still quite a ways back, it moved into Korea, what's now Korea, and into Japan. And so it's been a revered game for a long, long time. And in fact, in ancient China, there were several arts that were considered especially important. In Japan, they're called kinki shoga, I believe, which basically stands for, kin, I guess, stands for music, probably a Chinese lute or something, but turned into the shamisen in Japan. The ki deals with Go, actually. The show had something to do with calligraphy and writing, and God dealt with painting, either an appreciation for painting or actually painting yourself. So a cultured person would develop these skills, and so Go was one of the 4 key elements of that. And so I'll tell you how the rules of the game are actually pretty simple, but of course, a game that's so revered, that's been studied for 4,000 years, you're probably not going to learn all there's to know about it in the next 45, 50 minutes. But I do hope to introduce you to some of the basics of it. And I'm going to leave a small Go set for anyone who wants to play. So in here's a 9x9 Go set, and there's a little rule book and some stones and things like that. So. つまらないものですか？
いただけるんですか？ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます。拍手。
So the board you see is 19 by 19, the number of lines on it, and stones are placed. They're called stones, ishi or stones. Go-ishi is go-ban, go-ishi, go-kei, or go-ki is the bowl that you put the stones into. Um, and you place the stone on an intersection and it stays there for the rest of the game, unless it gets removed for some special reason. And so, and players take turns placing stones on the board. I'm not putting them in any special way or anything, just placing them. And they go back and forth until both players decide to pass and the game is over and you determine who's won the game. There's Chinese rules, which I know, and also Japanese rules, and then there's some variations, but they're all very, very similar. So, but I'll describe basically the Japanese rules today, because those are the rules that I tend to play by. So in any event, in any of these rule sets, when a stone is placed on the board, there's a number of intersections that are next to it. So in Japanese, a dame, like dame, liberty. Dame kind of means no good, right? Like a no good point, but it also is a word for liberties and go. Maybe it's probably related. And so I sometimes call it a breathing stasis. It's the number of intersections that are directly, either horizontally or vertically next to that stone. So this stone has how many liberties? Some of you know how to play though. Yeah, you'll So anyway, there's four points there. Good. How about that? Great, good. Let's see, you have a tougher, well, okay, first there. All right, let's see, people are giving me the finger. Okay, how about now what? You're gonna need more than one hand. Excellent. Yeah, Tom. 6, good. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if they're connected, then you count them together. So that's one unit. It can get a little more complicated, but here, let's see. Sorry, can you see? How about that? 5. Yeah, correct. So, okay. And the idea is they stay on the board unless you lose all the liberties. And so by losing them, your opponent ends up surrounding each one eventually. So when you first learn Go, there's actually a word that people say. So when your stone is down to just one liberty, or a group of stones is down to just one last liberty, you say atari, which basically is the go. I think it means hit, like to hit a target or something. But once you get a little stronger, then it's considered rude to actually say it. Like most things in Japanese, there's times when things are rude and times when they're polite, and it takes like 100 years to be able to distinguish when you should say what. But if you say it to a strong player, the feeling is, of course I see that where you think I'm an idiot, you know, baka this. So, but when you're first learning, you want to point out, like, I could capture the next move. It's kind of like saying check in chess if you play chess. So if for white's turn, for example, white could play here, and now those two stones, originally they would have had 6 liberties, but it'd be similar to these 2 black stones, but 3 of them are missing. So they now have 1, 2, 3 liberties, but still on one turn, black can't take 3 liberties. So on the other hand, if white plays somewhere else, which is perfectly legitimate, then black could play here, and then this stone is captured as a prisoner. Agahama, I think is the name for prisoner. Go. So there's taken off the board, and yay, look at that. Cool. And so, by the way, the idea of the game, which I'm building up to gradually, is not necessarily to capture it, but it's actually to surround territory. So I mean, I'll say more about things. I don't want to bore you stiff. I'm trying to give you the idea of this game. So, like, let's say it be way later, hours later, we rejoin this game, and let's say they made these nice rectangles, something of that sort. But there's all sorts of other things. But basically, black has surrounded this area. So if it's in the center, black would have to use a lot of stuff. That was from a class. Let's see. Okay, we'll do some more counting in a second. Okay. So, well, that's not. So if someone's a very strong player, they'll say that's not a lot. Okay, I'll do that. these black stones surround this area, and at the end of the game, black would get 6 points for that area. And so you're trying to get the largest total number. So it's a constructive game. It's not so much necessarily trying to kill your opponent, though that's part of it. There's a lot of tension between the two players. But in a sense, in my view, you're building something from scratch, because the board starts empty. Unlike a chess game, which starts with a bunch of pieces, and you're knocking off your opponent's pieces as yours are getting taken away, and you're winnowing down and you're trying to capture the king. Here you're starting with nothing, and you try to build things, but your opponent is trying to interfere with your building as well as build his own or her own territory as well. But at the end of the game, black here would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the edge of the board is a natural boundary as well. So in addition, it'd be 2, 4, 6, 8 points here. So for example, so you'd be adding them up. You know, black would have 6 plus 8. Here's where the math part comes in. And then you add 1 for a prisoner. Actually, if you capture a prisoner, you actually would add that to your score. Or equivalently, you can subtract it from your opponent's score, because that either way will not change the relative difference between your two scores. In other words, winning 12 to 10 is the same as winning 14 to 12. You'd be ahead by 2 points. So there's kind of sneaky ways to count a little quicker. But in theory, black would have those points, these points, and this prisoner, and white would have 6 points. So it looks like white is losing right, but that's the idea. So interrupt me at any point. Questions?
Question.
Oh, sorry. I'll go around.
Do you need the cornerstones to capture territory?
Oh, do I need the cornerstone to capture? Oh, like, do you call this the cornerstone?
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. You know, it's a little complicated. Like here, this is completely black's territory. There's nothing that white can do to capture those. It's not so obvious. This looks almost the same, but in theory, so just to show you, like right now, still looks like 6 points because it's basically surrounded, and that seems to be a useless hinge point or something. But notice if black goes here and here, whoops, and then here, and then here, and then that's Atari, then they can be taken off. So the fact that they weren't actually attached to this group meant they had some slight vulnerability. Even though in actual play that'd be a very slow move to deal with, right? Like you could wait a while and sit back in the last second save it while your opponent's making all these moves. But you have to be aware that there's a latent danger there. There's a word in Go that is a great Japanese word for other situations, aji. So aji meaning taste, and in Go it tends to mean kind of a latent taste. It's like, in other words, maybe you haven't done anything, but these stones might have some aji, because later they may come in handy. They're not really doing anything yet. They're just sitting there. But anyways, that was a good question. Did I answer your question? Let's see. Other question?
Basically.
Okay. So this just gives you the basic idea. So let's see, what else should I say? So there's, liberties. The next thing to learn about, I guess, is a little bit about how to, so you capture, let's look at that group of stones. I know it's kind of like a math lecture here, but it's actually a beautiful art. It's not just mathematics, really. Okay, how many liberties does this group of stones have? 10? All right. Okay, who thinks it has 107? I know. How about 7? 8? 9? All right, so some different thing. Most of you are right. I think it has 8. So let's see, it has this, that's a liberty for it because that's next to this. First of all, they aren't connected, it's just one group of stones. They're either gonna stay on the board or be removed as a group. Okay, just because like these are all connected to, like this stone is not connected to those stones. Okay, so if there's 1, 2, that's not, so that's a corner spot, that's not a liberty, which is indirectly related to your question. So 3, 4, prisoner came out 5, 6, that Lavaji, 8, and then there's that spot also. So, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there were 8. Now, the interesting thing is, in Go, there's a rule that suicide is illegal, despite all the Japanese history of seppuku. Oh, just forget about all that. So in Go, you can't kill yourself. So for example, when you place a stone, it has to have some liberties. So like right now, white cannot play there, because when white plays there, this stone has 0 liberties, and so it has no breathing spaces. It's like diving, 100 feet underwater without any gear, so not a great idea. You can't play there. So in this situation with these stones, white can't play there because it's immediately dead, and so it's not legal to play there. However, the exception is you can play there if, by doing so, you remove other stones, because then you will have some liberties. So these are called external liberties, and that's an internal liberty. So white had to save that internal liberty for last. So at this point, like for example, white plays here, it says Atari, so they have this one liberty, and then black cannot play there because that's a suicide move, so that's no good. But on white's next move, white can play here, because as part of that move, these stones got removed, and that stone actually has 3 liberties, so it's perfectly legal. So this, notice this was a little bit different than just having a stone here, where I can just capture it. The order of moves mattered in this case. So at this point, black might try to run away or something, but there's ways to prevent that. So anyway, this is called an eye meh, like an eye like in your head. So this group has an eye. So there's a Go proverb that 1 eye dies, 2 eyes lives. So that's a group with 1 eye. If you have no eyes, that's even worse than no eyes. Yes?
So for black to run away, would it have to just make like a little line?
Well, it could do
across
that.
the board?
Well, if you're black's turn, like if you play along, remember you want to get territory. So if you're running along here, you may get out, but you're not gaining any points. So if you ran out along here and you got out, you'd be at least getting some points. And if you're moving out here, then you're getting even a couple more, because eventually maybe. So you're always making, it takes a while to understand the game better, but you're always making value adjustments. Sometimes you want to sacrifice, like, okay, I lost those 3 stones, but I can do something better somewhere else. It's one of the great things about the game, that you can lose a little somewhere, you can lose a battle but win the war type of idea. And so it's not all just one central focus throughout the whole game. But if you're focused on trying to save those stones and you have time, you could do something like that. And it's true, as long as you can gain liberties, you're not going to be taken off the board. But at the end of the game, one last thing I'll answer your question. Like, let's say at the end of the game, there's these 2 white stones here. Well, those 2 white stones don't have a hope or a prayer of ever forming a live group, because they can't make any eyes, and you need 2 to live, and they're totally surrounded by black. So even without black playing here, at the very end of the game, both players would agree, assuming they have the same level of understanding, that those stones are captured, and they would just come off the board as black's prisoners. So like same thing, like if the situation looked like this, so at the end of the game, maybe they would just come off, unless black could come up with some clever way to break out. So part of it's a little bit of judgment, but you can always play a throw and say, okay, I think I'm alive, and the other person, I think you're not alive, and you can take turns until it either gets captured or doesn't get captured. So you can always, get through disputes that way. All right, more questions?
Yeah. So if one player made a 19-piece chain,
Like all the way across?
Yeah, like going across, cutting through the board. How would you count that?
How could that get captured? Like in build a board or something? So you have like 19 going all the way across, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't do the whole thing. Well, here, we'll put that. So, yeah, so especially when you first learn the game, you may think, wow, what a brilliant idea. I now have taken this side of the board and that side of the board, and I've won the game 342 to 0. That's the number of intersections left on the board. So it seemed like a great idea. But actually, first of all, as long as white can form some live group inside of what you thought was yours, then it's not yours anymore. So in other words, white has the 6, and they're not captured, so black doesn't control that area. Whoops, I'll get that later. Well, white could put stones every single spot here and every single spot there, and then the 38 liberties that this group had would all be gone and it'd be captured. So it could be captured, actually.
Oh.
Of course, black might wake up somewhere along the way, hopefully, unless he's in a coma or something, but so there's 38 spots there. But good question. So here's the idea of 2 eyes. So let's see. Okay, this is a group of black stones. They're all connected and has two eyes, need, may, I guess, is that right? There's no way to capture it because it has all these outside liberties. I'm sure you don't have to worry about that, but just to double check that makes sense. And black's not captured yet because it still has 2 liberties, internal ones. But now, white can't, to capture black, white has to play both at this point and at that point, both of those. And if white plays at either one, it's illegal because it's actually a suicide group. So white can't play there nor there. So it can never get captured. So that's the idea that 2 eyes lives, 1 eye dies. Is this all ring a bell to you? So how about?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, question first.
So why would, if you took the center piece away, why would that? How could that get captured?
How would that get captured? Yeah. Okay, great question. All right. So if it's black's turn, first of all, what would black do? So you play there, right? Like it would not be smart to play there, by the way, because you would be going from the potential of 2 eyes to having 1 big eye. This can actually get captured because white could say Atari, as true black could capture back, but then white could play back in again, and black hasn't really gained anything. Black captured 1 stone, but then lost an additional 1, so it didn't matter. So, but if black plays there, black would have 2 eyes. So now it's white's turn, and it wants to beat black to the punch. So what white does to kill this group is to play there. So I call this group unsettled. Unsettled means that it depends whose turn it is. So it's kind of so strong players, they size up parts of the board and say, oh, this group's alive, great. Meaning, even if my opponent plays there, I can withstand that attack. Or it's already dead, in which case you don't want to add, there's another saying, don't throw good money after bad. Like you have a dead group, don't keep adding more stones, you're just giving your opponent more prisoners. But this is definitely unsettled. It's like a key alarm bell should go off, like, okay, maybe I better think about this spot. And so if white plays here, black now cannot capture, like black is captured. At the end of the game, all those stones, the black stones would come off. And the proof would be, if there's a disagreement about it, well, what could black could say, well, I won't do anything, let's see, capture me. So that what white could do is go there and say Atari, right? And black can say, okay, I can get out of that. But now we're back to that situation that we just saw a second ago. And then if white went there, black could capture, and then white could play here and take all those stones out. So if you can see that sequence in your mind, as soon as white plays here, it's over. Unless, of course, maybe white's not paying attention and all of a sudden they got captured. Okay, now let's say it's back alive again. So you do have to watch what else is happening in the game. But assuming that everything is super solid, so just to fix that up, that'd be captured. So what's the situation? So questions about that? I'm just kidding. I don't want to get too much into the weeds. I'm trying to just give you an appreciation of the game. but here we are. How about, let's see. Okay, now what's the situation? So it's got 1 big eye right now, but it comes down to whether it can make 2 eyes or it could be prevented from making 2 eyes. So there's three choices I'm happy to vote on. It's either live, meaning even if white plays first, black doesn't have to worry as long as black responds. It's unsettled, meaning it depends who plays next, whether it's alive. Like white could kill the group or black could live. Or it's dead, meaning even if black plays, it's already hopelessly lost. So who thinks it's alive as it is? How about unsettled? Dead? No idea. Don't really give it on. Lots of possibilities. Okay. Well, it's actually alive. So here's why. So it only has one eye at this moment. But if white, the best thing that white could do is to play one of these central points. So let's say white plays there, because there's 4 liberties right now, and white just took away one of them. But if white does that, black could answer by playing next to it. And those 2 points are called miai. And miai means seeing together. I think it's the word they use in Japan when you have an initial meeting for an arranged marriage. It's kind of a miai. So it's the same expression in Go. So there's two. So white plays here, black plays there. And white plays here, black can play there. So the point is that black could just sit back and do other things, and then if white ever makes a move here, and there could be a reason for it, but then black can answer, and now black actually has 2 eyes. Notice that white cannot play here or here. Both are suicide moves, which means at the end of the game this would come off, and black has 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 points of territory. Of course, if white plays there and black does nothing, white gets a second move in, which is possible if black has some more important thing to deal with, then it could get captured, but it'd take a couple of moves. So we would call that a live. So, all right, so let's see how we do it here. All right, let's see what else do I want. I'll show you a few more things, and then I will have you, if you want to play someone, I brought a bunch of like 9 by smaller boards, and you play a quick game and just get a feel for it. And several people here are as more expert than me at the game. By the way, in China, it's called Wei Qi, which is sort of like game of encirclement or game of some surrounding game, something of that sort. And in Japan, I think that's the right kind. I was trying to remember. That's not the most formal, but notice it has the stone element to it. I think in Chinese it has more of a wood is more of a key element, so it's a slightly different kanji, but involves stones and involves wood usually. So like for example, this is a wooden board, like just normal, and traditionally I brought along a clamshell disc, which I just picked up in Maine last weekend. Happened to be on the beach there. So anyway, you need like a big clamshell like this. And traditionally, the stones, the white stones are made from, you can come up and feel what a stone feels, but anyway, these come from actual clamshells that have been ground down, and they can just get 1 or 2 out of a big clamshell, so it's, they're expensive. So, and then the black stones, kind of interested in the artistic aspects, are made from slate. And similar grinding process for that as well. So, and some people have some very beautiful sets. Yeah, just to mention. So, let's see, if you go to Japan or China or Korea, so I found some Japanese, you can buy magazines, magazine racks, they have games that are, see, since the stones don't move, let this will, being a Go nerd myself, I've got all these posters. And so this is a famous game. Let's see. Game of the century. And it was played between a Go Seigen, which is his name in Japan. He came from China, and he was probably the greatest player of the 20th century, beyond a doubt. I mean, it's like everyone agrees to that. And he played another player, Honimbo Shusai, who was a great Japanese player at the time. But notice you can, the only reason I brought this is to show it's a game record, even though they broke it into 4 parts, you could do it on one piece of paper. Because since the stones don't move, you can write 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you can look at a key for a game record on one piece of paper, essentially, and follow the game. And you know, if you're a serious player, you study other people's games and you record your own and all that jazz. I mentioned, I brought all these things just for fun. This is a poster I kind of like called Life. But the poster shows all different ways, minimal ways to make 2 eyes. Because remember, you need 2 eyes to be alive. So it shows that, like in the corner, with just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can make a group with 2 eyes. On the side, you need 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, with 8 stones. And so this shows different shapes and different ways. You need 10 in the center, because you have to build all the walls to the thing. But it's kind of, I find it kind of elegant and beautiful from a mathematician's point of view. And what else I want to show you? Let's see. Like you can buy things like this. I bought this at the Nihon Kin, which is the Japanese Go Association building in Tokyo. If you go there, you can buy cards, like playing cards with Go, or little trays that have pictures of of Go players, things of that sort. And I didn't bring the fanciest. I do have some nice pictures, but with this cheaper one, I don't want to break any of these. But anyway, people draw paintings and stuff like that. And this was actually Chinese, I think, rather than Japanese, by the way. So, and let's see. Yeah. So Go for me has been a wonderful thing because I enjoy travel, and I've traveled to Japan a lot of times related to Go. And also China, like I've been in Shanghai and Shenzhen, things like that, and Thailand too. And this is from Genji no Monogatari, so there's a bunch of scenes in the tale of Genji that have that as a motif. And this I bought in Uji, which is in Japan near Kyoto. And there's a museum there, a Genji museum, which is spectacular. All sorts of sets of things and movies and things of that sort. And they sold some stuff like this. So that's where I got that. So it's a scene of Genji looking in on a Go game played by 2 princesses. So let's see. Okay, is that more questions first, or? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
For like I guess professional Go players, are there specific shapes that they're partial to, like that they're like, oh, that person like usually makes this shape, or like that's a common thing?
Sort of, yes. So yeah, I should mention, so in East Asia, there are professional Go players, just like we have professional golfers or baseball players. So tons of people know how to play and can get quite good. But if you want to reach the professional level, which is way, way, way up there, you have to learn when you're about 4 or 5 years old and dedicate your life to head with learning anything else. They probably know 5 kanji because they have no time to learn anything. No, they're probably very smart, but they spend really a lot of time working on Go. And the top players, so the rankings, the grades go from like 30Q, Q means like grade, so 30Q down to like 1Q, this is Japan. And then 1 dan, these are amateurs, 2 dan up to about 7 dan. Then after 7 dan, it's a bit of a jump to professional 1 dan, which is called pro 1 dan. And professionals go up to 9 dan. So Q dan is the highest level. In fact, there's a Go tournament in Japan called the Judan title, which is 10 dan. Only the 9 dans can play, and one person is called 10 dan for 1 year, because each year they have a new type. But anyway, the very top players, people follow them on television, like in Korea, there's a 24-hour station that shows Go games. In Japan, you can watch Sunday morning on NHK for about an hour and a half. They have a big match, which is always fun to watch. and people know their favorite players and they know their styles of it. So whether they have shapes, they all know all the different basic shapes, but they do have certain styles. So people know what their opening favorite things are. Some people like play more towards the center and try to get a lot of influence, and other people try to grab territory right off the bat. And so when there's competing styles, it really interests the public to see, you know, the top players with their different styles. Is pretty exciting. And I should say in the last 10 years, AI has reached a level where it has surpassed the best professionals, which is kind of shocking to the world of Go. But I think it's actually a positive thing because people have learned, now there's like a new teacher, and it doesn't mean that we're going to stop playing Go any more than we stopped walking once a car was built. Right? We still enjoy running, walking, even though quicker vehicles than us. So there's a smarter being than people, but we can learn from it, we can still enjoy the game, and can enhance our ability to play because we can double check was that a good move or not. And that's changing many of the professional styles actually. They're starting to mimic the AI a little bit, which is kind of interesting. Okay, we have 25 minutes.
There's another
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Oh, well, he had a.
Oh, actually, my question was about how computer technology has changed Go, so I'm on it.
Okay. I'm just giving a cursory answer, but yeah, it has.
I remember reading once that a computer AI has never beaten a top tier Go player. Is that still true?
No, so yeah, that's what I was saying. So that was definitely true until 2014 or 15. And then AlphaGo was this program created by some Google, I know one of the people on the team actually, in London, and they've developed some, and they unleashed it, and they beat the top players, and it was shocking. Like they had this
top
big,
players from various countries?
well,
Or-
at the time the top player was Lee Sedol, who was a Korean player, and he was the top of the world at that time. He's actually retired since then, and one of the main reasons is he was really put out by the AI. This is kind of a sad story in my view, because he was a great player and had a lot to contribute. But he had this match. I mean, the pressure, first of all, the pressure of these games can be extreme. You're just sitting still for hours. People lose like 10 pounds of water weight when playing in a big match. I mean, it's like running a marathon. And then when you're at the top of your country, you're playing at the top from another country. If you lose, people, you know, they apologize to the nation. You know, it's so much pressure. And then in this case, it was one person, and he's representing humanity, you know, not just his country. And the expectation was that he's going to crush this thing and put the Google people back in their place. And so when he started losing the match, like they had a 5-game match, the pressure on him was, you know, beyond imagination. But anyway, and also when you're playing someone, usually there's some human interaction. Like you can see their face, you know, they're pretty good at being stone faced, but there's some sense of appreciation. But he's playing against a machine, and there's a person who's making the moves for the machine, but he's not doing any thinking. So he's not getting any feedback, and I think it was very off-putting for a human being. But the amazing thing, in my view, is he lost the first 3 games, he won the 4th game, and then lost the 5th game. And he's the only human being who has beaten an AI at that level. No one since then has ever beaten an AI at that level. So he actually did a great thing, you know. Yeah, it was quite emotional at the time. It was pretty special. Yeah.
Did it's like if a normal game with humans, if it takes a very long time to play.
Oh, how long does it take to play? So
the AI choose really quickly, and then the human.
no, they've all had the same amount of time.
Oh.
So the rules were like, so let's see, a friendly game, maybe I should just talk rather than play, if this is interesting. A friendly game takes about an hour between 2, you know, friends. When there's a big match, then it may be as much as 8 or 9 hours per player. And in the Japanese matches, they'll have a best of 7, and each one takes 2 days. So they play, they take a short break for lunch basically, and then they're using clocks, and they make a sealed move. That way the person makes the last move, like if, let's say I'm black and you're white, and I had to make the last move, you would have all night to think about it. So instead, I seal my last move. Notice it forces me to make a decision, but you don't know what it is, only I know what my move was. So you can spend the night guessing what my sealed move is and think of all different, but anyways, tries to make it equal. So anyway, so it takes 2 full days to play a game at that level. And there's been some famous matches, like that Game of the Century, that took several months to play, not just 2 days, but 3 or 4 months to complete the game. And the game is in the people's minds probably pretty much 24/7, even when they're spending a week away and then they get back and they continue to play. So it's very grueling. So anyway, when they played the computer, the players each had, the computer and the person had 3 hours thinking time. And then there's something called byoyomi, which means reserved seconds, which is an overtime. And they'd have 5 or 10 one-minute periods. If you make a move within a minute, you still have 10 periods. If you take more than a minute, then you have 9 periods, 8 periods, etc. So it's a complicated system. But in a sense, it's not really fair to the human being, because the human being can maybe come through 1,000 different variations in 5 minutes, and the computer can do literally 1 billion variations per second. So so to make it equal, you'd have to give the computer really like 100th of a second for your 3 hours if you want to allow the thinking time to really be equal. Like time has a totally different meaning, but still they decide, okay, computer gets 3 hours, you have 3 hours, so that's the way it gets played. And the fact there's still one game is a miracle. But, sorry. Yeah.
A couple questions.
Sure.
So the game where the guy won and the computer lost, is that game like studied a lot? Like what did he actually do?
Yeah, it has been studied a lot actually.
78.
All the games have been studied from that. The interesting, well, first of all, the computer, what the computer does in this program, it guesses a bunch of different possible moves, and gives a percentage chance that the person, like, this is a good move, maybe there's a 10% chance they'll figure it out, 15% chance, et cetera. And then what it literally does is called a Monte Carlo technique. It plays through millions of games over the next minute with that first move, and then a million games and it sees who won the game. And then it does a table that way. So if figures, okay, if my opponent does this and I answer, let's play a million games from that point on and just see who, guessing what the rest of the game might go like, and then get the highest percentage win. So the computer's constantly doing that, and no human being can match. There's so many moves and like humans can read through maybe 40 or 50 moves ahead, but they can't play a million games of 300 moves. So even though their ability is astounding, professional. But the computer, the move that the Lee Sedol came up with, the computer thought it had 1 in 10,000 chance of a human being or a computer coming up with that move. It didn't come up with that move either. And so it didn't really study that move. So the Lee Sedol had a brilliant move that just went beyond the computer's capability or the human beings who are commenting. Like I was watching a commentary of the game, and they're guessing moves he might make, and no one guessed the move that this player made. And the computer kind of went haywire from that point on. So it started making moves that everybody, what the hell is going on? It was really terrible. Like it fell apart. I had like a nervous breakdown. So they've gone back, and if the computer could keep its wits about, which seems crazy for a computer, it actually still had a chance of winning. And then in the 5th game, Lee Sedol was actually winning that game when they've re-studied that game. But he made a slight error towards the end and lost by just a little bit. So he almost had a chance of, he was doing actually better in the 5th game than in the 4th game, which is the one that he won. But the computer also made some amazing moves that no one would have guessed, and people have studied ever since. So, like things that just didn't seem human, it's changed some of the basic understanding that people had at the time. But to me, it's not as wacky. Like people, when they make their first move, they tend to play in corners. Like they make various corner moves, and then they move towards the center. And the computer, even at the highest level, still plays like that. So it shows that people have been 100% wrong. Like, you might think that somebody from another planet would show up and realize that actually that's the best move to start. It had nothing to do with anything, but the people were on the right track, but the computer's just gotten a bit deeper. But no one can, even now, a computer can't play a perfect game. So like if God is playing a computer, maybe God could probably still come up with some stuff. The computer doesn't know the perfect move, it just knows better than any human being can play at this point. The game is so deep that it's not fully understood, which is part of its beauty, I think.
So, is it,
I'm from northern
So-
New Jersey myself.
in chess, the player that goes first has a very slight advantage,
yeah.
but that's not enough to actually guarantee a win even if you're the best player ever. Is it the same thing?
Yeah.
in Go?
Yes. In chess, white goes first and black goes second, and white has a slight advantage. If you play, two grandmasters play, they may have 15 draws, but white will probably win 3 and black 2, so it's a slight advantage to go first for sure. In Go, black plays first rather than white, so it's kind of interesting. And black does have, so for years and years, they just played equally, but they noticed that the strongest players with black won a lot of games. No one could beat them. So they have something called Comey, and Comey is the extra points that white receives in order to make the game equal. So it turns out playing first might be worth around 6 points or something like that. And to avoid a tie, the Comey tends to have a half with it. They keep changing the Comey, but currently the Comey in Japan and Korea is 6.5. So they have something called nigiri. Nigiri is how they determine who's black and who's white. I guess it means like splitting the stones or cutting the stones, or what's the meaning? Nigiri, cut in two. So at the beginning, one person takes a handful of white stones, and the other person takes either 1 or 2 black stones. They determine who's black and white. But then at the end of the game, white will receive a Comey of 6.5, and that's meant to offset and make it dead equal again. And with the half, you can't have a tie. So a really close game is a half-point win or half-point loss. And many professional games are at that level. If I was playing professional, they'd be up by 120 points. So they wouldn't have to worry about the Comey. But if they're playing at some other level, 2 equal players, then Comey matters. So, and there's these little, you might have wondered what these spots are for. They're related to a handicap in the game. So at the very beginning of the game, so in the United States, I'm a 2Q. So let's say I'm playing a 5Q. Then I'm 3 stones stronger, and so my opponent would start with 3 black stones, and there'd be no Comey, so the handicap takes that away. And that'd be the first move. So you can have a 3-stone handicap or a 4-stone handicap, depending on the relative ranking, or a 5 or 6, like that. You have 7, or you can have 8, and then the largest official one is a 9-stone. Whoops, right up to this. Sorry about that. Can't count. 9-stone handicap. But when I teach the course, I start with 17. So if you're playing a beginner, you can throw some more than the rest of it. But the idea, it's not to prove how smart you are, how great you are. It's really about it's enjoying the game, improving your own understanding. And unlike chess, where I always had a feeling, I used to play chess competitively when I was in high school. It was more like crushing your opponent and their ego. Here, it's festive, like you're trying to enjoy the game with someone. You're using your mind to its fullest, or trying to win. But when the game is over, it's very, very common to replay the game with your opponent, and for both of you to make comments, to talk about what you were thinking, to help enhance your understanding of the game for future games. So there's a lot of great support out there.
I have a question.
Oh, sure, of course.
I'm intrigued by the title of the course, Game of Go Japanese Culture.
Oh.
And then did I hear that you said tea ceremony is connected to Go?
Well, in my view, yes. It may seem like a stretch, right?
Well, so I'm very intrigued about tea ceremony and Go. How is it connected in your head?
Yeah, well, so as I mentioned, when you play Go, there's sort of an attitude about it. It's kind of a quiet, contemplative game. When you start the game, say onegaishimasu, like you're being polite to your opponent, you're thanking them for spending time to play with you. So in my course, I have the students choose any art they want. I give them a list of about 30 different. So it used to be I'd let them choose and several people choose the same thing. And like guys tended to choose like kendo or some of that sort. And women more likely ikebana or something. It seemed to be gender specific, but not 100%. But so I give them a list, I have them choose their top 4 choices, and then I assign so that everyone has a different thing, and they do a report on it, and then we talk about its relationship to each other. And so, in my view, there's a common spirit among many of these things. A sense of like, to give one example of aesthetics, like in Go, the points that you get are the open intersections. So it's actually not the points on the board, it's actually the emptiness that counts. And that idea of space is very important in like Japanese gardens, the placing of stones and things. And it has a lot to do, if you think about music, like beats and then kind of a silence, or anyway, there's lots of ways that you can relate many of these concepts to other arts. And the tea ceremony has sort of a period of people greeting each other and appreciation of the utensils. Go has also beautiful bowls and boards. You might spend a little time, like professional Go players, before they play, will take a rag out and actually clean the board for their opponent. Anyways, it's just a sense of respect, I guess, for the game, its history, and your opponent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe rather than play games, because I know you have to eat dinner, etc.
No, it's 6:30.
Okay. Oh, yes, another question.
So you said that you're a mathematician?
Yes, that's right.
So
how do I play? How do I get into this?
no,
question.
actually, it's a math question.
Okay.
Have you ever played this game called ERS?
No.
Well, the reason that I ask is that so the way it works is that like you basically put cards down, and when there's like either a pair or like a pair sandwich, like 2 of the same card and 1 in between, you can slap the board and take the pile, and you want to get all of the cards.
Okay.
And so I figured out that there's like a certain probability of there being being a pair at any given time, and there's the same probability of like the sandwich also being there. So
And you've been working on it. Yay.
The next question is that calling the probability of there being a pair m, to be able to calculate the probability of there either being a pair or a sandwich, but not both, would I be doing 1 minus n
Yes.
squared minus n squared?
Mm-hmm. If you want, we can talk after this.
Okay,
about that.
awesome.
Yeah, sounds good. But that's you're on the right calculation. Other questions? Yeah. So let's need that. The game reminds you of another game that you're interested in. A simple game that some people play on this, by the way, is called Go Moku. Like just getting 5 in a row. you know, just, so it's kind of more of a children's game, but actually pretty complicated too. But anyway, all right, here, so
Like a Connect Four kind of.
it's kind of like that, yeah, so connect 5.
Yeah.
And just go back and forth, and yeah, so if you'd like to play this for fun, I brought, you know, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sets plus that set, I guess. Or you can watch, but that's enough for a lot of people to give it a shot. You could sit at the tables back there or something, just help yourself to, yeah, take one of these. That was yeah, shout out to our students. That's so much fun.
So,
I watch them. Oh, I know.
I ordered, the library here has the.
They don't have 23, they only have up to 22.
Was that the final?
They might order. Okay.
I'm not about.
これ止めます。